It is a pretty usual technique, but most of the time the terrorists refuse to take on a gendarme or a policeman as a hostage. So I was surprised that this time the jihadists decided to take him on. On top of it, obviously it gave a lot of intel to the SWAT teams to know exactly what was going on, and I suspect the terrorist was really amateurish not to think about him leaving the phone for the other to listen in. So
he left his phone engaged in a call to his fellow officers outside, essentially, so they could hear everything that was going on within the building, within the hostage situation.
Exactly. So that was the best intel they could get, and that's how they knew that they had to go in the moment they went in. In many situations, especially when they have to deal with jihadists, they know that they don't want to get caught alive. And by dragging on the process of negotiation, they're losing an advantage. So this went for 3 hours, but I suspect they could have done it a little earlier, especially knowing the profile of the terrorists inside. So they didn't want it to just go on forever, but then they didn't have a choice when they intervened.
When there's a hostage situation, do the police authorities ask for a volunteer amongst their ranks, or does the senior officer simply volunteer himself or herself?
It depends, because especially in France, there's so many different layers of authorities dealing with the issue. It's the police, the gendarmerie, and also there are 2 types of SWAT teams. So it's extremely complicated to know really what's going on, especially since they're competition. I think it's a spur of the moment, somebody just deciding that they will give themselves up. But also, as you may know, this officer had prepared 3 months earlier a drill that was exactly to have a hostage situation in a supermarket in Carcassonne. So that's why I suspect he gave himself up for the swap.
But he would have been briefed, would he not, by his colleagues as to what they wanted him to do in the situation that he was in. He would have been briefed, for example, as, dial us now, and if you can keep your phone somewhere so we can hear, do that situation.
Right. Actually, in this case, he didn't need to be briefed because they had prepared that in a live case scenario 3 months ahead of time, and they had all those scenarios. When they look at this, they know exactly what kind of things they have to put in place. So if they can keep the phone, they keep it all the time. They have to hide it for the terrorists not to see it or not to ask for it, which is strange that the terrorists didn't ask for it. But in any case, this is really different from any other operations that we've seen, is that everybody in his team was prepared for such an attack.
Yeah, how different, in which ways was this hostage situation different from, for example, the hostage situation at the Jewish supermarket in Paris a few years back? What were the identifying differences, do you think?
But I think the first thing was, in a way, the amateurishness of the terrorists and the plot, because we still don't know if the supermarket was at all a target for him, or if it was because he was pursued by the police that he decided on a whim to go into a supermarket and take people hostage. All this is still extremely unclear what he intended to do. So if that was unprepared, that's one of the things that you would understand how he let a lot of things slip by, if you will, compared to the one in in Vincennes, in the supermarket in in January 2015. This one was extremely well planned in terms of the target, in terms of what he wanted to do, in terms of what he had in mind of his ideology to speak to the media about his claims. And it went on for a long, long time. I mean, the police didn't storm the building for a long time after, sadly, 4 people had already been killed by the jihadists.
And from what you say, these differences, would you say it's because this attack was, as we're beginning to understand, was a lone wolf attack that wasn't being ordered like the previous attacks on Paris and elsewhere by Islamic State in another country?
No, I think it's not the reason why. You're looking at the case that we just discussed about the kosher supermarket in Paris. It was claimed for on behalf of Islamic State, but it wasn't sanctioned directly from Islamic State. So I think it has much more to do with the fact that in this case the terrorist was not trained, was not planning it the right way, if you will, and that's what the main difference is really a process where he would know what to do, because also they found 3 unexploded devices that he had prepared, another handgun, a knife. So he had a lot of weapons that he could have used and that were not being used. And I'm sure that somebody trained by the Islamic State directly would have made good use of that, if I can say that.
Was this one of those occasions where the attacker got lucky in a way, because the authorities knew him? He was on their radar, and it is, to a certain extent, by chance that they weren't following him, they weren't putting him under surveillance on the day that it happened.
Right, but as we've discussed in the past, the terror watch list in France keeps on growing. I mean, we're now up to 18,000 people on that list. So the likelihood of him being followed was close to 0 in terms of not having intel, because at one given time, the services follow and monitor about 100 potential jihadists. So 100 out of those 18,000 they have on their list, 3,000 of them they consider dangerous and potentially ready to act. But still, I think that there has been another mishap in this whole case, because he was on the list since 2014, and he was granted French citizenship in 2015. And why would they grant citizenship to someone they have on a terror watch list? So it slipped through the cracks again. So the whole system has to be reviewed and taken from the ground up.
And what other lessons will the authorities learn from this attack?
That they're not reading a radicalization process the right way, because in 2016 and 2017, he was monitored and he was viewed as a non-radical without any major inclination to either take on a jihadist attack or move towards a much more radical stance. So the miss was there because they spent the time and the money to monitor him, and they miss the signs.